Okay, I just realized I'm officially a geek or nerd or something like that because apparently I have a favorite article or favorite articles. This article, for example, is one of my favorites because it was one of the first that helped me start thinking about the way the physical body relates to stress. And it's a fairly simple study that includes a few types of variables, which takes me to the overview of the study, also known as the abstract. This article doesn't label the abstract with the word abstract, but like I mentioned in the recording about the summary process in general, it does have a paragraph between the author's names and the text of the article. And since I know that's where to look for the abstract, I know that's what this paragraph is. After I used Paste Special to add the text to my summary file, I did a little bit of formatting to make it easier to refer back to later. Paste Special does take out all the formatting, so I put the headings back in bold like they are in the article. Then I added a line break, in other words, I pressed enter, so each part stands out a little bit more. Now I'm ready to move on to finding the information about the focus of the study. Reading the abstract helps me know that the study was about upright posture, slumped posture, and stress. So I know I'm looking for information about why they're interested in those variables, which is the purpose or the goal, what questions they're trying to help answer, and what predictions they make. The first two paragraphs of the introduction section were about previous studies, so I jumped to the last paragraph on page 633. It started with the phrase, "this experimental study," which was promising. When I kept skimming, I found the phrase, "our overall hypothesis," so I knew I was on the right track, or on the right place. The information in that sentence and the one after were the hypotheses. After I found that, I kept skimming to make sure there weren't more hypotheses, and I almost missed the last one because the authors detoured a bit to explain more about the logic behind the hypotheses. But the phrase, "further hypothesized," jumped out at me, and I realized there was another hypothesis. So I know the researchers had 3 hypotheses. I copied and pasted that information into the second section of my summary worksheet, adding labels to help identify the 3 separate hypotheses. I also added the page number at the end of each hypothesis. When I remember to do that, it's helpful if I want to double check my work or find more details later. But what about a purpose, goals, or research question? That's when using Control F to find keywords is helpful. In this case, I looked for the word purpose and only found information about the procedure, and the word question only used in explaining the questions addressed by previous studies. The word goal was in the title of one of the articles in the references. As I mentioned, hypothesis appeared a few times, but not as a prediction for the study. I also checked for predict and expect without any results, so I'm pretty confident this is a good representation of the researcher's focus. This is a good example that I still need to read and think about the information in the sentences when I use keyword search too. The word hypothesis is used in the first paragraph of the article, but it's not talking about the hypothesis for the study. Instead, it's talking about a theoretical perspective called the facial feedback hypothesis. Okay, now that I figured out the focus, I'm ready to find out how they got people to participate in the study. In other words, how they recruited participants. With my knowledge of APA style, I knew to look in the participants section, which is on page 634. I started skimming, and the phrase "were recruited from" caught my attention pretty quickly. The rest of that sentence sort of explains recruitment, kind of. The next sentence explains the characteristics participants were required to have, but not really how they were contacted. The sentence about screening via telephone or email indicates they had a way to gather phone numbers and email addresses from potential participants. It wasn't a general cattle call, in other words. We know they didn't just tell people to show up at the research lab at a particular time. I kept reading that paragraph and didn't find any more information about whether researchers posted flyers or placed ads or anything about how they actually contacted participants. So in my summary, I said, it doesn't directly say how researchers contacted potential participants, because it doesn't. But if I look at it later, I might think I just forgot something if I don't make that note. Knowing about the screening does suggest that they must have had a 2-step process for recruiting. They didn't just schedule everyone who was interested. That makes sense given the exclusion criteria. Now that I have a general idea about how they recruited the participants, emphasis on general, I want to find the details about the people who participated in the study. I actually found some of that information when I was looking for the recruitment information. Most of the time it works out that way, since articles that follow APA guidelines include that information in the participants subsection of the method. The first sentence says there were 74 participants. The information in the second sentence is more general, but it helps give a sense of the characteristics of participants. They had to be over 18, they had to be able to read and write English, and be over 18. The exclusion criteria in the next sentence also adds details about who wasn't included, so they can help me understand the sample. I'll put those details in the other relevant characteristics section of the worksheet. After the exclusion criteria, the authors include the information about the people who did actually participate, or some information. The number who identified as females is the largest group, along with the average age and age range. As a side note, most of the studies we'll see treat gender as binary, so if the number who identify as female is included, the reader is to assume the rest of the sample identified as male. I think that form of bias in publications will reduce with new publications. Okay, I found the number of participants, number who were female, and the information about how old they were. I also have the information about inclusion and exclusion criteria in the other relevant characteristics section. I skimmed, used a keyword search, and checked with someone else who read the article, so I'm confident I didn't overlook anything. The authors didn't report ethnicity information for one reason or another. I made a note that it wasn't reported, so I didn't have any questions about my attention to detail later, and then I moved on. This recording is getting a little long, and this is a good point to pause and review, so I'll end here. If you're completing the summary along with the recording, this is a good time to make sure you have all of the information from this recording. If you're checking the summary you completed on your own, you'll want to do the same thing. If you're going to do the summary after watching the recordings, you might make a note of where you'll find each piece of information.